All right, so this week for our TV podcast, I guess I'll level with you up front. You probably won't be extremely interested in what we're doing this week because this is way more my generation of stuff. But this is just something that came up again, like how I kind of like to find little ways to tie things together. So we were doing All Creatures Great and Small a couple of weeks back, and one of the things that came up that kind of surprised me is just the difference in the generations, where you were saying how when you were a kid, that type of show, an hour-long British drama, would have been great. You would have had no problem watching that. And like, for instance, you used to watch Perry Mason with great gusto when you were a kid. Where I was saying, by my era, by the 80s, everything was a frenetic, high-action toy commercial, usually a cartoon. Everything was half an hour. The very idea of sitting through an hour-long show that's just about actual humans talking and having relatable issues and problems, there's no way. Like, as a kid, I just couldn't even fathom having the attention span for that. And I was just surprised that you were surprised by that, of how much things had changed.
I'm still surprised by that.
Because even stuff like Sesame Street, even the educational shows of the time, like Sesame Street was deliberately designed to have small, bite-sized, you never stay with one thing for too long because kids already had no attention span by the 80s.
Okay.
It was actually a big deal in, I don't know, when did Blue's Clues start? The early 2000s maybe? But the idea that Blue's Clues was a half-hour show that had an actual half-hour plot that you were supposed to pay attention to for a whole half hour was quite revolutionary in the kids' TV space because it had not been like that for 20 years.
Yeah, because see, when I grew up, there were things like all half-hour episodic things, Robin Hood, and I was a young kid when that was on. Any number of them again. Davy Crockett, all of those were half-hour shows.
Yeah, and again, we had half-hour shows, but they were, He-Man and stuff. They were real
even
crazy.
In my day, the commercials would have been so small. That whole idea of this hour has 22 minutes, that really was the reality by the time that show came on, because there were so many commercials. But in my day of a kid growing up, commercials weren't long at all. A couple of, a minute maybe, 30 seconds.
That's actually one thing. Apparently there was a period in the 90s where we had, our Canadian laws didn't allow as many commercials as they had in the States. So TV shows would actually film extra scenes, supposedly. I've never seen proof of this. But just if you ever watch a TV show in Canada from the 90s and there's just some stuff that doesn't seem to have any point, just a lot of extra people walking from place to place or whatever, apparently they actually filmed extra scenes for the Canadian version.
That spot.
Yeah.
Well, there definitely is something to the whole, how the length of commercials, because as a young person, say, I can remember watching shows in after midnight thinking, oh my God, I can't take this, because the show would start off with a fairly decent length of commercial time. But at the very end, the commercial time was longer than the viewing of the movie time. I know that because I timed it. I said, I can't believe this. God, it's ridiculous how long this takes. And I remember when I was about 20, timing it. And for sure, you get 5 minutes of commercial and 3.5 minutes of movie.
Yeah, no, it's definitely true because I could tell just from, especially when I was a youngster, a lot of piracy in the early days of the internet. I was all about just downloading stuff. So obviously they would cut the commercials out. Like an example is Ren and Stimpy. When Ren and Stimpy was on, it was 22, 24 minutes or whatever. But then they revived Ren and Stimpy in the later on in the 2000s, and it was 20 minutes. So there was a literal 10 minutes of commercials in the half-hour show. It's yikes.
Yeah, pretty pathetic.
And an extra commercial break. There used to be, it would be split into 3 segments, and then it was split into 4. For the extra commercials.
And when that TV show, This Hour Has 22 Minutes, came on, I remember people commenting at the time, oh yeah, that's really tongue-in-cheek, that's really ridiculous, that's a bit much. But it wasn't. It was the truth. That you really only had 22 minutes of viewing, and the rest of it was all this fodder fill.
So what I thought I would pick, though, for cartoons of my youth is when we were doing All Creatures Great and Small, and we were talking about this, the first thing that came to mind for me was the Smurfs, just because it's so bizarre. What a weird just 100 little blue men. It's like, what the hell was that all about? So I just offhandedly said, we should watch the Smurfs sometime. But the Smurfs, I mean, it's not going to, we're adults. We're not going to enjoy the Smurfs on any level. It's just going to be a weird, like, what a weird thing. Let's just dive into that. So I thought we'd do two things. The Smurfs, because it's just so famous. And there were things like that. There was like the Monchichis and the Snorks and stuff, but they were not nearly to the level of the Smurfs. The Smurfs was like a phenomenon, just totally taken for granted. The Smurfs is so famous, it's just everywhere. So
and where did they originate from?
Yeah, it was well, I guess we'll get into it more after, because I got
okay.
two things, so we'll do the Smurfs second. But it's a Belgian guy who made the
Belgian.
Smurfs.
Yeah, I was thinking French, but I knew it wasn't French.
But it is kind of, because in Belgium it's half Dutch, or half German. No, it's Dutch, half Dutch and half French.
Yeah, Dutch and French.
Yeah, and just that there's these things like that even though there were, I assume these other things like the Monchichis and the Snorks came after, but they just weren't as popular as the Smurfs. And like, just what a weird thing. So I've got some info about the Smurfs, but I'll get into that after. Because the other, by far the most popular, the big towering cartoon of the 80s that like was not even close. The other shows weren't even as close to as popular, was the Transformers. Like, we had He-Man and we had G.I. Joe. We had Thundercats. Like, it starts dropping off fast after that. Transformers was the thing. And it really was pretty cool, because it was like a America and Japan combined effort, where the toys were from Japan. Originally, it was just toys. But they kind of sent it off to America and said, can you make a show about this, make a storyline to help us sell these toys? And they nailed it. They knocked it out of the park. So the idea is, they're robots from, some robot planet, and the evil robots are trying to steal all the energy of the Earth, and the good robots are trying to help protect us from the evil robots. But the reason they transform into stuff, again, originally it was just toys from Japan. They just thought it was neat. Like, look at this. This robot turns into a little car. Cool. So the idea that the Americans came up with is that they're the robots in disguise. Like, if we knew there were robots on Earth, it would start World War III. It would just be a fiasco. So they transform into everyday objects. It might even just be like a ghetto blaster or something. Usually it's a car, but it could be different things, so that they can integrate into our world. There's a tractor trailer driving by. Little do we know, that's the leader of the good guy fucking robots, So pretty cool. But when I went back to that show, they released it on DVD when I was like 17 or 18, and I went back to watch it, and it's fucking garbage. The thing that it shocked me to see this, watching it again, is there was an episode where they got in like a snowball fight, and the main good guy's name's Optimus Prime, so he throws a snowball at his friend Jazz, and Jazz goes, "Hey Optimus, that's no fair." And I was like, holy shit, this show sucks. like that was a real downer, because Transformers was the tip top. It didn't get better than Transformers, and it was terrible. So if that was terrible, just imagine how terrible He-Man was, and imagine how terrible Thundercats was. Like, I don't even want to go back. I don't even want to risk it.
I don't think that when you mentioned about the TV show, and you mentioned some of the comment about it, it's dumbing it down for kids. I don't think you have to do that to make a good children's show. You don't have to work on one level. You can work on a number of levels and have it really excellent TV kid shows.
Yeah, which I guess came up when we watched the Batman animated show from the 90s. That was one of the nice things about that show, is to go back to that as an adult, and it's still good. Was like, whew, mopping the brow, like, thank goodness. But one thing that I think kind of explains it a little is they put out a documentary a little while ago about, was it about He-Man? Or there was this show called Captain N the Game Master, where he goes inside Nintendo games. It might have been about that. But anyway, one of the guys who wrote for that show said they wrote 2 episodes a day. Like, in the morning, write an episode. Go for lunch. In the afternoon, write an episode. So that helps explain, in some ways, why they were so terrible. Like, nobody put any time into this shit.
Well, and there's a lot of, as you say, they're trying to sell product. So oftentimes you'll make it very simplistic, because you have this attitude, oh, well, that's good enough for kids. Kids aren't really smart anyway, but that's not true. Kids are smart. And kids can watch things at different levels. You get a real young kid who might watch it at level A. But some other kid who's kind of really on the ball, maybe a little older, watches it at level B, level C, gets a whole different thing out of it. And those are the kid shows that survive. Those little one level, simplistic, dumb and down shows, they don't make it.
I guess I'm kind of two minds about it because I would have agreed with you, before. But then when I think about it, it's like, yeah, but the truth is, when I was a kid, I didn't notice. I did not have even the smallest problem with the bad writing in Transformers or any of these other things.
Because what else did you know, though?
Right. But then also, I mean, take the Transformers, for example. They're still making multi-million-dollar Transformers movies to this day. So it worked. Like, it's hard to criticize them, even though it's like, yeah, this is not what I would have done or not what you would hope they would do. But nothing about it failed. It's still going as strong as ever. So,
Okay. Well,
yeah, so it's like, I wish it weren't necessarily the case, but I don't
now
know.
I'm going to go way back into cartoons. Let's go back to the Bugs Bunny cartoons. Now, Bugs Bunny cartoons worked on any number of levels. They were not just one level A and with dumb commentary and things that were totally irrelevant. They worked on all kinds of levels, which is why as an adult, you can go back and watch that stuff and just love it. You loved it as a kid, you loved it as a teenager, you loved it in your early 20s, you love it as an old person because it works on all these levels.
Yeah.
I mean, excellent, excellent writing, and not written just as with this attitude, oh, well, kids, we can pass anything by them.
Yeah, I mean, you certainly hope things will be that way. That's for sure. And I mean, I do think especially Pixar is very much like that now. Like they have, what's that movie called? Inside or Inside Out? But it's about this kid who moves to a new town and is kind of depressed because she has no friends. And then inside her brain are the 4 quadrants. And as a kid, you just watch it and it's a funny cartoon. But as an adult, you're like, oh man, there's all this stuff going on. Or there's this movie Up, about this old man who attaches a bunch of balloons to his house and sails away. But it starts with this like 10-minute mini movie about his wife dying. And you're like, whoa. So I'm sure kids just glazed over, like whatever. But adults are like, holy shit, that's the saddest thing I ever saw in my life. Or probably my favorite one of theirs. They have a whole bunch of like movies that are good for kids and grown-ups. It's called Wall-E.
Oh, I love Wall-E.
Yeah, where he's just a little robot keeping his 80s, finding his Rubik's Cubes and stuff. But then he gets on this space station and it's all these jerk-off people that don't even walk anymore. They just float around and they're big fat slugs.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was a fine film. However, what Transformers did have that I think does still kind of hold up is they made a movie in the mid-'80s. And we're not going to sit here and watch the whole movie, but I figured instead of watching just one random shitty episode of the Transformers, instead I picked the 3 most notable scenes from the movie. So they add up to about the same as a half-hour show. So I just want to show you these things about this movie because the movie was way higher quality and was actually really cool. And in particular, it was, I don't think this ever happened before or since, is that because it was a toy line, they wanted to bring out new toys. And this was all a new concept. It kind of doesn't exist anymore because this was only in the 80s that they were this brazen about making cartoons about toys. And as I understand it, like the FCC or somebody, like they started regulating this stuff after the 90s because it was so just, I mean, that's what the 80s is famous for, right? Is capitalism run rampant. Even in your kid shows. It's like the Mattel Chocobot Sugar Power Energy Hour, is like the joke version of it, but it kind of was like that. It's like everything is just, here's a product to try to sell to the kids and go harass your mom that buy you this fucking toy that you saw on the cartoon because we gave the toy a personality and you identify with the toy. Go get the toy. And it was like pretty gross. But what they wanted to do with Transformers is obviously out with the old, in with the new. So they were like, okay, we got these new Transformers toys we want to sell. How do we get rid of the old ones? And of course they could have just stopped writing them into the show. You don't even have to explain it. Just some new Transformers came from far off in space and now they're here. Forget about the old ones. Like we're kids, we wouldn't have thought about it. But they didn't do that. What they did is this. So this is the first scene I want to show you from this movie. Because especially, these are still kid shows. Like I said, it's like, hey, Optimus, that's no fair. Like it's just goofy. It's just silly
Corny.
stuff, right?
Yeah. Real corny.
You certainly wouldn't expect anything particularly... Well, let me just play it. I don't want to give it away. Let's just show you This was right at the start of this movie. So those were, it's almost disturbing to me still to watch that, because those were all major characters. Every week they were on the show, and that was it. They never came back. They all just got fucking murdered. And it's just like, what the fuck is going on? Like, that's so crazy. That never happened in He-Man. That never happened in G.I. Joe, which was actual war. Never. They're just like, yeah, fuck it. Kill them. Just fucking kill them all. And like, yeah, like I had a bunch of those toys. I could tell you all their names, all their personalities. Those are my little fucking cartoon friends. And they're just fucking dead. And it's like, dude, what the fuck? They actually got like tons of complaints about this movie. Of like parents that were upset. I think that's why they never did this again. And they kind of, they did put out a G.I. Joe movie after this. And you can tell they did weird stuff. Like they added voiceovers of like, oh, so-and-so's in a coma, but it's okay. He woke up. But that all happened in a voiceover because, you know, they meant to kill the guy. But after the blowback from Transformers, they're like, wait, maybe we can't just murder the characters in a kid's cartoon. Because, like, little kids are going to be a little disturbed by that.
Yeah, well, really, on television, you didn't see that. You always knew at the end something terrible always happened to the character before the climax of the movie or the show or whatever. But at the end, there was always a resolution that was, he's come out of a coma. He really wasn't shot. That was just a shadow of him that was done. There was always some...
And particularly in this case, because they're robots, it'd be the easiest thing in the world to be like, well, Megatron got one up on us and, you know, wow, he stole our ship. But don't worry, we fixed everyone. But they didn't. They never came back. Those guys are all dead. And it's like, what the... And it's so extra brutal because it's so... That was like a minute and a half. And that's it. They're done.
Yeah. But then again, they're machines. Right? I know that in your world, they were almost like humans. They had personalities. But really, they're machines.
Yeah, but I mean, to a kid watching a cartoon, I mean, I don't think there's really any difference between a Transformer and He-Man, you know? It's all just cartoon people.
Yeah, it's cartoon people, but they are people that... They're people. I guess that's the key word. They're like people.
Right.
There's no definition of it. It's like in 2001, Space Odyssey. The machine in that actually has human capabilities, can make decisions for itself.
Right.
And you kind of lose sight of the fact that, yeah, it's just a machine.
Well, I mean, in a way, I guess that's sort of a thing you could say about where I was saying how much I didn't like the, you know, hey, that's no fair. But that's a good example of why this was so disturbing, is because they didn't act like machines. They didn't act like robots. They just act like goofy cartoon characters. Hey, that's no fair. You know, that's super not machine-like.
Yeah. Right.
That's to a kid watching it, that's just a character. That's just and again, like this was like, the show had already been on for a couple of years, and it's one of those, you know, mass-produced shows. So each season was like 70 fucking episodes or some crazy shit. So yeah, just very bizarre choice, I think. Very.
So in this, that's the opening of the movie, and they just wiped out major characters.
Yeah, and that is not the tip of the that is the tip of the iceberg. That's not as because the next scene I'm going to show you, we had no idea how bad it was going to get. That was an overture. That was the hors d'oeuvre to what was about to happen. So the basic idea of the Transformers is that the white dude we just saw, that's Megatron. He's the evil leader, and his second in command, Starscream, who clearly doesn't really follow orders that well. You know, they call each other idiots and stuff. And then on the other side is Optimus Prime, who is he's like a tractor trailer. And he has this thing, it's like a MacGuffin, they never really explain what it is, but he has this thing called the Matrix of Leadership that is just this device he has that they never really explain, but it's what makes the good guys always win. It's just like this thing that when you have it, you're extra awesome. And if only the bad guys had it, maybe they would win for once. But the good guys have it, so it's just important to know that. And again, just to get, like, it's one of these things you can only be sentimental about if you were a kid in the 80s, but Optimus Prime was like the good guy that you believed in. You know, he was the one that wasn't just...
So are the bad guys is part of their modus operandi to get the Matrix? Is that...
Yeah, it's mainly to siphon all the energy from Earth, but if they could get the Matrix, it sure wouldn't hurt. And yeah, because I'm just thinking of like, you know, like good guys. The whole notion of a good guy, it's just corny and it's boring, and it's like, you know, no one ever felt anything about He-Man, say. It's just, who cares, He-Man, or the good guys in G.I. Joe. I'll take the bad guys just as easily. Who cares? It's all just cartoon shit. And I don't know what it is about Optimus Prime, but they just did a good job with him, where he's like, yeah, I want to be under that guy. I wish he was, I would follow him. This guy's cool. And this is what happened to him.
Megatron must be stopped, no matter the cost. You got the touch!
Fare thee well, Optimus Prime.
Yeah, like I find that genuinely disturbing. Like I'm just trying to think of what would be like, because again, like that never happened before, and as far as I know, never happened again in any kid shows I've ever heard of. Like imagine when you were a kid, because we also watched Friendly Giant, right? How, you know, you watched it as a kid and then I watched the later version, but it was the same show basically. Imagine if they did an episode of the Friendly Giant where the Friendly Giant lies down and turns gray and never moves again, and Rusty and Jerome are weeping.
Yeah, but
like that would stick with you.
At least, yes, but that would be a person that died, and you deal with death in the real world a lot. Now, what is surprising about this, again, this is a machine. You think that they could fix the machine.
Right.
But then, hey, machines have their time too. Any machines in the real world eventually get to a point where they are not repairable, they're not fixable. So,
but I mean, what, like, but it's, I don't know. I mean, this might sound weird to say, but how is it a machine? Like, how is it? It doesn't act like a machine in any way.
And I get what you're saying, because you know where I would compare that to? Bambi, the death of Bambi's mother. Old Yeller, they have to put the dog down at the end. That stuff.
Yeah, and it's just like that they went so far with it. I mean, he's in the hospital. They're showing the meters go to nothing. He turns fucking gray, and the music and everything. It's like I know you didn't want to sell the Optimus toys anymore. That's fine. Did you have to go that far? You know?
Yeah. Well, yeah, and why didn't they want to sell the Optimus? Why not?
Yeah, well, then it turns out to, you know, I mean, Optimus in that form never came back. They rebooted the whole show later on so that they were robots who turned into animals. So that was like, let's start over. And then in the new version, Optimus was back in it, of course, because it's, you know, 20 years later. But yeah, it was none of the...
and how did they explain that? What did they do? Dig up the old machine and fix it?
It's just, no, we're just starting over, just rebooting. I mean, they do that with everything. They, you know, start over with fucking Teenage Mutant Ninja Turtles and start over with...
I can see that being pretty traumatic for a kid.
Yeah, well, I mean, it just sticks with you. I mean, you know, like... I mean, you know, being in real hospitals later in life, and it's like, it's not that different. There it is. It's just depressing.
Then what happens? Like, that's not the end of the show.
Right. Well, the only other thing I was going to show you, because, you know, ultimately it's just that dude who, when he... Oh, by the way, Ultra Magnus, who he gave the Matrix to, that was Robert Stack. I don't know if you recognize the voice.
Oh, yes. I didn't recognize the voice, but I know Robert Stack.
But that other guy who caught the thing, and also the reason Optimus died, that fucking nitwit Hot Rod who's getting in the way of everything, he turns into the new Optimus, and no one bought it. That kid sucked. And so his toy also didn't sell that well. So it was just a bad move all around. This whole thing was just weird. Why kill off everybody so willy-nilly just to make new toys that aren't nearly as popular? But I just thought I'd show you this other scene of what happened to Megatron. Megatron got away a lot better than Optimus. They found a much kinder way to make him into a new toy, ironically. They're like, let's kill the good guy, but the bad guy won't be so bad. But this scene, I think, is double interesting because it's about this enormous planet named Unicron that you find out at the end is actually also a Transformer. He transforms into a robot. He's the biggest Transformer ever. And he's voiced by Orson Welles. And it's the last thing Orson Welles ever did. And, Orson Welles would make these, like, kind of, disparaging comments about, like, this is what it has come to. I'm now voicing toys for children in a cartoon or whatever. But I mean, I watched Citizen Kane. I didn't like it. I have no interest in ever watching it twice. I think this Transformers movie is one of the best things Orson Welles was ever involved in. And this character in particular is awesome. He does, like, such a good job. It's so cool. So I just thought I'd show you this scene because this is not traumatizing and scarring like Optimus Prime. But it's just interesting to see what happened to Megatron and just to see the final piece of work Orson Welles did. That, yeah, I mean, I understand why Orson Welles thought this was dumb, because it's the dumb kids cartoon made to sell toys. But in actuality, it's pretty fucking rad. It's pretty cool. He does a great job.
Jettison some weight, or I'll never make it to Cybertron.
Fellow Decepticons, Astro Train has requested that we lighten our burden. What did he say his name was?
Galvatron.
So yeah, that's a great example of how, you could have done something like that with the good guys.
Yes, I'm thinking that myself.
It's weird that Starscream is the only bad guy who really gets it, and he is an asshole. He kind of deserved it. But yeah, it's weird too, because it's like cool on the one hand of like, cool, they're transforming into the new forms and stuff. But then on the other hand, because it was such a blatantly commercial show, like when they introduced the new bad guy and they're like, behold, Galvatron. In a way, it's just like, behold, the new toy to go buy as soon as you're done watching this movie, But I love that that character, Unicron, of just like, no one summons Megatron. He just goes, then it pleases me to be the first, Or your bargaining style is highly, what is it? Your bargaining stance is highly dubious. Just all this stuff he says that is weirdly fancy that I assume was probably Orson Welles who brought that in. But
Yeah. But you get a Megatron character who is arrogant right to the end until he is finally forced into, if he wants to survive, he's got to cave in. But he's arrogant right to the very last minute.
Yeah, even in the face of a guy who's so big that he's a planet. Like, what the fuck? So then, yeah, the rest of the movie is like that dipshit Hot Rod learns how to be a leader, and they use the matrix of leadership to blow up Unicron, and that's really it. And then it's like, join us again for season 3 of the Transformers with all the new characters that you don't like as much as the ones that we just fucking massacred. And the show did, I think, only last one more season after that, and then then it became those endless iterations.
See, and I don't know what the point of that was. Even if you want to introduce new characters, but keep your main men, or your main characters, your main two.
Yeah.
And you could be just as successful introducing new characters.
Well, I think, though, in a way, it's almost a shame, because I feel like the industry at large did learn that lesson, but learned it way too well. Because, yeah, like I said, they're still making Transformers live-action movies to this day with Optimus Prime and Megatron in them. And, they remade the Ninja Turtles like 6 or 7 times.
Yeah, and how good are they?
I mean, it depends if what you're into, but it's hard to say. I mean, they're not great, but the original wasn't great either of any of this stuff, right?
Except you probably had every freaking kid in the early 80s was into this stuff and it wasn't just the video of it, it was those little toys. I mean, they were kind of cool, like, and you had to be kind of dexterous to figure out how to do the exchange, because I can remember trying to change those figures into vehicle or vice versa. And like, oh man, like what a frustration. Whereas you kids could just pick them up and almost with one hand. There it is.
I mean, in particular, once they got into the triple changers, and there were ones where there's little robots that you had to like attach inside someone's chest, or their head would detach and become its own robot. And if the head or the chest piece wasn't in, you couldn't do one of the transformations. Yeah, it was some complicated shit. But anyway, yeah. So I just thought, if as far as kids cartoons of the '80s, again, Smurfs was the main thing I had on the docket this week, just because it's like just weird. The Smurfs, how weird. But I thought I'd throw in the side dish of Transformers because. If it was just the Transformers show, I'd be like, who needs to watch that again? Fuck that. But that movie had some weird stuff in it, some really neat shit, and just crazy. I don't know how else to describe it. Like,
And I gotta say, I never watched any of those when they were on and you kids were watching them. But the Smurfs, I did watch a couple of Smurf shows. But no, Transformers never caught my fancy.
well, I think Transformers also was only of the '80s. Where, speaking of the Smurfs, I'll bring up my Smurfs facts. I mean, Smurfs were around when you were a kid. Like, they started in 1958. So.
But we never had them.
Right, but
Yeah.
but I just feel like you'd be. It's not as weird that you were aware of the Smurfs, more so than the Transformers, because they're not really contemporaries so much. Just that they happen to both have cartoons in the '80s that I watched. But anyway, yeah. So on from the, like, again, that's where with the Transformers movie, like, again, I just feel like it's a little bit irrelevant that they're robots, because maybe it's because the robots, they thought they could get away with that level of wanton murder. but yeah, no kid took it that way. So that was kind of the height of brutality. That was as rough as a kid's cartoon maybe ever got. Like, nowadays we have shows like Adventure Time and things that are for kids and for grown-ups, and some weird stuff happens. Even like SpongeBob is surprisingly creepy sometimes. But yeah, no hospital scenes, no weeping over the grave, like, that was fucking crazy. So then on the other side of '80s kids cartoons, the stupid ass Smurfs, which is possibly the dumbest thing. We'll see if it holds up at all. I mean, I loved the Smurfs at the time. I had nothing but fond memories, but I have a feeling this is going to be a whole load of old hooey. But anyway, here, let's do the recap of the Smurfs. So the Smurfs, in French, Les Schtroumpfs, and in Dutch, De Smurfen. It's a Belgian comic franchise centered on a fictional colony of small, blue, humanoid creatures who live in mushroom-shaped houses in the forest, created by Belgian comics artist Peyo, which is the pen name of Pierre Cullifard. So they first appeared in Peyo's previous comic that was called Johan and Pierre Louis, that was like a medieval adventure comic. And in 1958, the Smurfs appeared in that. And they were so popular that then a year later they received their own comic series. And the Smurfs is, in a way, almost the opposite of how the Transformers started as toys, and the idea was, let's make a series so we can sell these toys. And then the quality of that can be debated. But the Smurfs started as these characters in this comic, and then became so popular they got their own comic, and then really quickly became like this Smurf empire of Smurf toys and Smurf miniatures and all kinds of Smurf shit that people still collect to this day. That, it was almost like... almost inevitable. It's not like they were trying to push merchandise and that's why they made the Smurfs. The Smurfs were just so dang popular that it just followed suit, that let's just make every pillowcase and toothbrush and Smurf whatever we can for the rest of time. And now we live in the Smurf world. And also, I'd kind of forgotten about this, but the way that they talk, Smurf along with me, they just throw the word Smurf in everything. I'm gonna go
Smurfing.
go smurfing down by the river or whatever. Yeah. So the way the term Smurf and its accompanying language came about is that Peyo was having a meal with his colleague and friend Andre Franquin at the Belgian coast, and he momentarily forgot how to say the word salt in French, which is just sel. But because he couldn't remember the word, Peyo asked him in French to pass the Schtroumpf. Just made up a word for whatever reason. And Franquin jokingly replied, "Here's the Schtroumpf. When you're done Schtroumpfing, Schtroumpf it back," just to kind of make fun of him. But then they just spent the rest of the weekend speaking this Schtroumpf language, or they would just say Schtroumpf instead of whatever they were saying. And then that name Strumpf was later translated into Dutch as Smurf, and that's what was adopted by the English version. So that's where the Smurf language came from, is he's just fucking around and couldn't remember how to say salt.
Now, it got started in 58, but when did it get translated into English? Like, when did that start?
I didn't write all the specifics, so the comic itself, just as the Smurfs, started in 59, and I mean, sounds like probably pretty quick, because it didn't just get translated into English. There's a whole thing on the wiki page of here's what they call them in Mexico, here's what they call them here, here's what they call them there. It became this big worldwide Smurf phenomenon, and they all have their different names for the Smurfs. But I didn't really dig much deeper than that, because this is where you can really get overly deep about every stupid thing if you want to. You know, I could go way deeper into this, like, you know, Transformers and shit if I really wanted to. And people really want to with the Smurfs. Like, for instance, there was this one Smurf story that was called, like, Smurf versus Smurf, where the Smurf village split into the north and south, and they argued about their language. Like, do you say a pail of Smurf, or do you say a Smurf of water? Where do you say Smurf? And they were fighting with each other, and apparently that whole thing was like an allegory to, or like a parody of the French versus Dutch language battles that are always happening in Belgium, that they couldn't come together, so they're just fighting about Smurfs. And then the idea of the Smurf village in general is like there's Jokey Smurf and Handy Smurf and Smarty Pants Smurf, whatever the fuck that guy's name was, Brainy Smurf. They all have their little thing that they do, but there's no actual money and there's no actual jobs. You just contribute to the Smurf village as you know, as you can, and then everyone looks after everyone. So there's this whole big article about like how the communal Smurf fucking village is like a statement on the state of socialism in Europe.
Yes, that's what I was thinking. Is it socialism, communism? What is it?
Yeah, and I mean, who knows, right? Again, you could get into it. I don't particularly care to, but you could
love everybody, you know.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So yeah, if you want to, you can get real deep with the Smurfs. But what I decided to focus on with the Smurfs is I always thought it was particularly strange that all the Smurfs are men.
Isn't there some little girl Smurf, and isn't there a grandmother Smurf, or?
Well, eventually. So yeah, it started off that there were 99 Smurfs for whatever reason, and then Papa Smurf was the elder Smurf, and the rest are all, I don't know, strapping young 20-year-olds or whatever old. I think every Smurf's supposed to be 100. I don't know. It's all fucking nonsense. Like, that's where it's just kind of silly to me. I'm willing to say like it's man, it's pretty brutal when Transformers die, but I just can't. I can't make the leap into Smurfs. Smurfs are just stupid, fucking dumb little blue things that happen to get popular. But for whatever reason, they're all dudes. One of them's old, the rest of them aren't. And they eventually introduced Smurfette. And I do remember that episode because Smurfette wasn't originally a Smurf. She was created by Gargamel, who's that creepy old man with his cat that just lives in the woods and is always trying to... He's always trying to find the Smurf village, but I don't know why. Certainly there's nothing good that he wanted to do with the Smurfs. So he created Smurfette, and she was like this weird little Raggedy Ann Smurfette with dark black hair, and then somehow the Smurfs, through the Smurfiness of their Smurfdom and the goodness of their Smurfs, turned her into a beautiful, blonde, super cool, hot Smurf chick, and then she became one of the Smurfs. I don't know, just fucking weird. So I don't have that episode though, because I thought she was the only female Smurf, but just picking through stuff, I found this is from season 5, episode 8. So that would probably be like 1986 or so. This character Sassette, who's the second female Smurf, and I don't remember her at all. So I was like, well, let's watch that episode, because female Smurfs are so rare that I'm just curious, what is the origin story here? How did they introduce another female Smurf? You know? Because, yeah, I don't know, it's just funny, like, also people who do want to deep dive into this kind of stuff, you know, they obviously pick their targets of like, yes, you could say that the Smurfs are about communism or communal social blah, 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 socialism. But let's just ignore the fact that they're all dudes. What does that say? You know, what does that mean? You know, nobody wants to dive into that, but it can't be anything good. It's fucking bizarre and weird. So, yes.
And then to introduce one or two, whichever you want to have, of the female race in amongst 100 of these guys, like...
Yeah, it's almost weirder.
Yay.
Yeah, it's almost better just to keep it as all... Because even if, I guess Grandpa Smurf had a beard, but if not for him, you wouldn't even necessarily know that the Smurfs are male. They could just be hermaphrodites or something, or just, gender neutral little blue things that live in the forest, walking fucking, fungus plants or something. But yeah, once you introduce women, it's even weirder. Like, why isn't it half and half? Why is it literally two? So I doubt that we'll get too many answers from season 5, episode 8, Sassette. But I decided if we're going to watch one, because again, I just feel like this is just going to be kind of dumb and stupid. I just was like, since we're talking about the 80s, I just feel like, I don't know, again, we get like comments and stuff sometimes when we don't like shows that people like. I don't expect that any rabid Smurf fans are going to come across this and be upset that I don't have anything deep to say about the Smurfs. But I feel like if you do have something deep to say about the Smurfs, get your fucking life together. I'm going to say that preemptively.
Well, hey, let's watch it, though. You never know. We may have something deep to say about it at the end.
We'll see.
Maybe there's more to this than meets the eye.
Maybe, but don't hold your breath.
Very far from here, some 2,000 miles away. That's where they live and work and play.
Well, first off, let me just stop that right there, because I didn't remember this theme song either. So the Smurf village is some 2,000 miles away? From where? From Belgium? Like, what? You can't just say from 2,000 miles away and give no other accompanying information. Anyway, sorry. Also, what the hell was that theme song? That wasn't the theme song. It's supposed to be...
That's not what I remember, but...
It's supposed to be la 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 la, Smurf along with me. La 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 la,
see, I don't
happy
remember
as
what it
can
is,
be.
but that didn't sound familiar to me at all.
So maybe that's also why I don't know Sassette. Maybe this is too deep into the run. I mean, I guess 5 years in, maybe I was done watching the Smurfs at this point. Because yeah, that's all of this is feeling a little weird. This is not quite how I remember it. So yeah, I don't really know what to say about that. I mean, it's exactly what I kind of expected. It's just the Smurfs, just fucking dumb crap. But I mean, it's pretty representative of a 1980s kids cartoon. They were all dumb crap when you look back at them. Like I was saying, even the towering heights of the Transformers, which was the best one on the TV show version, was just dumb crap. So yeah, it was all dumb crap. Yeah. But that, I mean, again, I don't know. That's just weird too. Like, if you were to dig into it, I don't really have the mental wherewithal to give a shit to bother. But what you couldn't come up with anything positive to say about that, as far as it being an allegory for anything or metaphors or whatever. It's like the Smurf view of the female gender could only be described as quite negative, right? I mean, everyone's happy because they're all a bunch of dudes and they're all just hanging around. The only reason there are women is because the evil wizard created them, and then when he creates them, both in Smurfette's case and Sassette's case, they're a real pain in the ass because they have their own personalities and they dare to actually have a personality, but then Papa Smurf douses them with the wonderful magic of the Smurfs, and then they fall into line, and they're just nice young women, and they don't cause any problems anymore. It's like, what the hell is this?
Thank God there's an evil wizard and his cat, because that's the only thing that gives any life to that thing.
Yeah, and I mean, that is actually the one reason I'm kind of glad I watched it again, is just because yeah, I thought it was a little weird reading about the Smurfs, that they debuted in this medieval other comic. I was like, that's strange. So they started it as a medieval story, and I just assumed in my memories of the Smurfs, because the whole thing is the Smurf village is just in the forest and humans can't find it. Gargamel can never find the place. So in my memory, it was just a contemporary show. It was just in the woods. That's why we never see cities and stuff. But now looking at it again, seeing Gargamel and his weird thatch-roofed shack and his terrible clothes with patches in them and stuff. Like, he is a destitute medieval man. You know? His life is pretty rough, pretty bad. So that's kind of interesting, because I just never realized that the Smurfs is some kind of weird medieval show.
Yeah. Well, it's really just good versus evil.
Yeah.
This thing, all good versus evil, and good prevails.
Which kind of again ties back into why it's sort of it is very interesting to me, just looking back at my own life, and I'm not the only one who has said this, a lot of people have, that, like, I don't know what it is about Optimus Prime, that for whatever reason Optimus Prime is the one good guy who maybe seemed like, yeah, I could get behind him, and then maybe later on, 10 years later, Captain Picard from Star Trek The Next Generation also was like, yeah, I could get behind this guy. Like, I'd be willing to follow the orders of this guy. But those are the exceptions to the rule, because generally speaking, in every cartoon, and Disney is famous for it, but all of these stories, the good versus evil paradigm is so bland and so boring that you're never on the good guy's side. You're just kind of vaguely on the bad guy's side, because at least the bad guy is interesting in some way. But yeah, good versus evil is just like the most boring thing in the world, and it's just
because
like,
the most successful good versus evil stories are where good has some problems. Good has issues that good has to deal with. Evil is not just black and white evil. He usually has some features that are, I won't say redeeming, but features that interest you enough where there's some little things about him that you say, I'd like to know a little bit more about this character, like why he's like that. Whereas in something like this good versus evil in the Smurfs, there's no question who's good, who's evil. You're black, you're white. That's it. No gray areas, no redeeming features, nothing.
yeah, and again, that's where I just feel like I don't know what there is to say about the Smurfs. That it's just like this guy made this weird little goofy ass comic that just caught on because it's just a funny weird little thing. But yeah, I just don't think if there is anything deeper in there, it's not interesting.
And even the little girl, the little set that they introduced, she has a few of these different little layers in her personality. Like she's made by Gargamel, but she's not evil. She wants to belong.
Right. Although she was, well, I mean, before Papa Smurf doused her with the pacifying magic, she maybe not evil, but she.
Yeah. But she's got a personality. She's got a side to her that is a little willing to take chances, willing to be a little different. But of course, once she gets doused, then she becomes pure white, good. No real personality one way or the other.
And speaking of that, Smurfette, I mean, like every other Smurf is named after what they do. You know, Handy Smurf, Brainy Smurf, even Greedy Smurf. It doesn't always have to be a good thing, but it's what they do. Smurfette, her name is that she's an et. Smurfette is a woman. That's all she has. And that whole episode was about how she had no one to talk to because she wants to talk about shoes and dresses and this stupid fucking.
Yeah, she's got a very, very limited personality, whereas the other little gal doesn't. Now, I presume in future shows, since she's been doused with the magic, that she is just another Smurfette.
Right. And then, like, yeah, you were saying how you remembered there being an older female Smurf, and I looked her up, and yeah, she shows up in, like, season 8, and she's Nanny Smurf, so we all know what she does. She just looks after people.
Yeah, but where the heck would she come from?
Yeah, who knows? Who knows and who cares? But yeah, I mean, the blandest, most stereotypical representation of women possible in this show. Like, again, that's where I feel like if you were to dig down and write your university essay about the Smurfs, I would not recommend that. But what possible positive message could you get out of this stupid show? It's this weird. But that's another aspect too of the 80s that is not the case anymore, is it was super, super gender divided. Like, absolutely. There was Transformers for the boys, and there was Gem and the Holograms for the girls. And I watched everything, because pretty much everybody watched everything, because we just wanted to watch cartoons. But we knew, when you're watching the Care Bears and you're watching My Little Pony, those are the girl shows that you're watching. And you're watching G.I. Joe, and you're watching He-Man, the most masculine possible show. Those are for the boys. And yeah, that was just a weird thing, which, again, probably was just based on the fact that they were all toys. it's just probably easier to market toys to a specific gender. If you go in Toys R Us, it's still boy toys and girl toys. But cartoons are not that way anymore. Now it's like Steven Universe and Adventure Time, and like they're just for everybody now, which I guess is better. It's certainly not worse. But yeah, it's an interesting thing about the 80s. Is like they had no compunction about that. Where that seems so unusual now in North American society that it's even weird, like when I was in Japan, all of the bathroom signs were the standard little cutout people like we have here, like the little stick figures, but the male one is blue and the female one is pink. And even that just seems a little weird, because it's like in the 80s we would have done that, but nowadays, no way. You can't do that. Someone would be mad about it.
Yeah, you're not supposed to make any comment about gender one way or the other.
Yeah, which is weird. Like, I mean, obviously there's downsides to both. It is almost a little strange that we're so dogmatic about the reverse, but it's certainly not worse. Things were clearly worse in the 80s, where it's just like, I don't know, I guess I'm glad that in that era, I was a boy. I feel like if you were a girl, like, man, you're just like passively being shit on all the time, and there couldn't be a better example than the fucking Smurfs, where you're lucky there even is a female Smurf, and it's only because some creepy evil wizard made, it's almost like biblical almost, like Eve in the garden. See, now I'm getting all deep about the Smurfs, but it's like, who's gonna bring down the brave, noble male Smurfs? It's this evil one. We gotta do something about this evil girl Smurf that we never wanted in the first place. Like, it must just have been weird to be a girl in the 80s, and you're just like, what the fuck is this?
Those, and how long it took to introduce those women characters into the Smurfs. Like, did some women get or girls get up in arm and say, how come? Because obviously it's a girls' show. To me.
The Smurfs? I don't know.
To me, the Smurfs is, well, yeah, it's flowers and...
I guess.
Flowers and sweetness and light and...
I would say, though, but again, because there were no females even in it, I don't think that the Smurfs is a girl show. I think the Smurfs are just stupid. I think it's just a dumb show, but I think it was... probably intended.
If I was a kid, if I was a boy, I would be, and let's say you had the two choices, the Smurfs and let's say the Transformers. If I was a male, I would obviously pick the Transformers, no question about it.
Yeah, that's fair, yeah.
And as a girl, I might too. But as a girl, I would definitely watch the Smurfs.
Right. Yeah, I mean, I don't know. Yeah, I guess it's
sweetness, it's light colors. You get flowers and butterflies, and even the evil stuff is not dark and foreboding evil. It's not like in the Transformers. It's like dark.
I guess though, where I would say like the Smurfs is just kind of gender neutral, if anything, is that the girl shows in the 80s were super duper girl shows. Like Gem and the Holograms was literally about, just a bunch of girls who put on magical makeup and turn into pop stars, and like or the My Little Pony. My Little Pony.
Well, then maybe the Smurfs was more like a transition show.
Yeah. Well, I think the Smurfs just didn't know what the fuck it was. I don't think the Smurfs had any thought put into it.
Before it had the girls in it, like, you wondered, where was the conflict? Was it just with a bunch of these men and Gargamel? Is that it?
Yeah, I didn't think it was. So yeah, so that's what I mean when I say, like, it seems like the Smurfs to me is just a stupid show. Is the other shows might not have been good shows, but they had a vision. They had, we're going to be the Care Bears. We're going to be the Inhumanoids, like we're going to be a thing. Where the Smurfs is just like, I feel like this guy literally just made some tiny little funny looking blue guys in his other comic, and just by accident, it just became a phenomenon. Like, I feel like there was no thought. That's where I guess I wouldn't be too hard on the Smurfs for the fact that it's all male Smurfs and there's no female Smurfs. I don't think it was deliberate. I think Peyo just didn't think even for a second about what the fuck this shit is. You can even tell with how much magic there is. Gargamel just magically makes Smurfs, and Papa Smurf magically corrects their various behavioral problems.
He has a little bottle of magic stuff in his back pocket.
Yeah, like even
Doesn't even have to go make it. Doesn't even have to go get it off the shelf. He just reaches in his back pocket and...
Yeah, like even these other shows, or even like if you go back to like Pinocchio type stuff or whatever, at least there's like there's some kind of overarching like theory to how it all works. This is just nothing. It's just nonsense happening. So anyway, I hope I hope no big Smurf fan stumbled upon this, because I knew coming into it, like, I was gonna, you know, I have fond memories of the Transformers movie, because I feel like that was kind of, man, that was some weird stuff going on there, and I have no memories at all about the Smurfs, and there's no reason to have any. It's fucking just a bunch of nonsense. So yeah, I don't feel very charitably about the Smurfs. But again, I didn't dislike it. It was fun when I was a kid, but it certainly doesn't hold up anymore.
No, it doesn't have a lot of depth to it.
Still going though, because as we were doing our little research, like there's the 2021 computer version of the Smurfs, of course. Like, but I mean that's not unique to the Smurfs. Like there is nothing from the 80s that hasn't been remade. And I mean, again, the Smurfs technically wasn't from the 80s, but that cartoon started in the 80s. So just that's an interesting thing too, though. Another side thing, as far as the boy and girl delineation in the 80s, that My Little Pony was possibly the most girl show of all the girl shows, because it was about little pony toys and the ponies talk, and you brush the hair of your pony toy, and like that was like a step too far. Like even though I would watch Gem and the Holograms and I would watch Care Bears, I didn't watch My Little Pony. That was too much. But they made a new My Little Pony show like 10 or 12 years ago, and it's hugely popular with guys. So it's just a different world now. It's like that's not it's not like gender specific shows. It's just not a thing. Even My Little Pony is no longer gender specific. So I don't know, that's kind of interesting, but not interesting enough for us to dive into My Little Pony. So don't worry, I'm not going to bring that one next week.
I think I'll pass on that.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is probably our one-time dive into this particular era, because like again, I don't know, Transformers was the best, Smurfs was the weirdest, everything else is just pales. Even next to these particularly pale offerings, everything else is even paler. So, unless, I don't know, I guess I won't say never, because it might be interesting to take like He-Man, for instance, because He-Man was so masculine. I mean, it's called He-Man. It's the dumbest name for a show ever. But they made She-Ra. They made the girl version of He-Man. That's maybe a little interesting. But we'll save that for deep into the future, because these shows just aren't good. Like, it's not really a lot of point in watching them, except as a deeply theoretical exercise, because it's just a bunch of shit. That I was telling you, I saw a thing about these, like, people who wrote these shows back in the day and how they would write 2 episodes a day. Like, the definition of a day job. They got hired to write these kids' cartoons. Nobody gave a single shit. And like 2 episodes a day is like wild. Even for this type of mass-produced 80s stuff, that's still like 4 times faster than you should be going at the minimum.
You're obviously not able to give it a whole lot of depth and thought if you're pumping it out that fast.
Yeah, I mean, it's funny too, even just how much they reused animation. Like with He-Man, every single episode, by the power of Grayskull, I have the power. There's an easy 2 minutes every time that they just use the same exact animation.
Yeah.
Where that's what I was saying at the start, that I wish I could give kids more credit. Theoretically, I definitely agree that kids deserve more credit, but the actual evidence does not bear that out, because I had no problem watching the same recycled animation over and over in all these dumb, terrible shows for years. I didn't even notice.
But sometimes that is because that's all that was presented to you.
Yeah.
I mean, what could you have done about it?
Yeah, that's true.
I mean, you couldn't have said, look, I'm tired of watching it. Well, you could have turned the TV off, I guess. But you couldn't very well say to whoever these writers were, those producers were, like, cripes, can't you have a different beginning? Can't you redo that animation? Where were you supposed to go with that?
Yeah, you just spend longer than 2 hours writing a script.
Yeah, so there you are. I mean, you're sitting there watching the TV, and that's what's given to you. So you take it.
Yeah, I do wonder nowadays. I wonder if it's different because there's more options. Like, we just had to watch what was on TV at the time, but now that kids have Netflix and have YouTube and stuff, because there's still some very shit shows, like even big companies like Disney. Like, I remember I was at a hotel once, and just playing on the TV was like a 3D animated Mickey Mouse, Goofy, all of the classic characters, Donald Duck. But it was like obviously a show for young kids, and it was made on a shoestring budget. And even Disney is pumping out these like badly animated computer shows, and I'm like, God, this fucking sucks. So do kids still just swallow what they're given? Or in the modern era, I mean, now that they could switch off, they don't have to watch that, but why would Disney make it if people weren't watching it? You know, it doesn't it doesn't bode well. But, you know, I mean, I guess we'll just leave it on the paradox, I guess, is that kids are smarter than you think, but they're also fucking stupid. They can be both things.
Yeah.
So-
Well, they'll oftentimes just take what you give them.
yeah.
But if they had,
Yeah, maybe that's the thing. If you're a parent, or more importantly, if you're a producer of television shows, have some dignity. Don't just make some shit. Like, I was really surprised to see how bad the Disney one was. I figured at least Disney would put their back into it, but everybody was just shoveling out this fucking, once computers hit especially, and you could do 3D animation, and they're just like, there you go, here's some garbage.
yeah. And usually it comes down to, rather than good writing, good productions, oftentimes it's just, well, you know what, we can generate X amount of money with this product, we can generate the same amount of money with this product. So, let's go with the cheap one, because we're going to generate the same amount of money anyway.
Yeah. Yep, it's a dang shame. You should be mildly ashamed of yourselves, TV producing people. but then on the other hand, it's like, hey, I'm glad I had all this stuff when I was a kid, because I don't know. Well, that's one thing I think is like interesting about my particular generation is I was the first generation to have my childhood just backwash straight into my face. Because like if you say even right before me, like the kids in the 70s, they had like, you know, whatever, fucking Puff the Magic Dragon and all those Rankin Bass type things and whatever weird stuff. And then they just grew up and moved on with their lives. They didn't see that stuff again. Where it was like perfectly timed for me that all of those cartoons that I watched as a kid, the internet hit when I was a teenager. So by the time I was like 16, it all came washing back up on shore, and I could watch it again, not decades later, right after,
And then they
and
came
realize
the
that it
next
sucked.
decade and made it all into movies.
Yeah, and then but that is the ultimate, like sad spiritual fucking, like, I do feel like my generation is spiritually bereft. We got nothing. We gave up on religion. We don't believe in that anymore. We saw all of our childhood shows and we realized how bad they were, but we didn't bail ship at all. We're like, just make more Transformers, make more Star Wars, make more Ninja Turtles. It's all terrible, but just keep giving it to me.
Yeah, and I'll keep taking it.
Yeah.
And I'll keep paying for it.
And it really is it's real bad. It's real bad. The new Transformers movies, holy shit, they suck. They're terrible. But people keep going. So, anyway, yeah, there's no good way to end this episode. This one's a downer, but oh well. Next week I'll find something. We'll dig back into our more traditionally interesting stuff, where I'll go into an older show that's a real show, and we'll watch that instead.
Yeah, go in for something like, I don't know, Gunsmoke or Paladin or Cannon or, you know, some of those.
Something non-terrible.
Yes, something that's got a little bit of depth to it.